like feeling of inevitability that can come with some people. Where the guy who I met several years ago while I was doing comedy, who it seemed like everybody was like, oh yeah, this guy's gonna make it. Might take a while, but eventually he's gonna pop.
Yeah.
And then he just got representation like a month ago. He was one of the people who I looked at him and I was like, I'm not willing to work that hard.
Right.
So
Yeah,
this
not
is
at
not
this.
for me, because I'm not going to deal with putting together shows like that, and I'm not going to...
You see people like that in wrestling, but like more often someone walks into your wrestling training facility and you're like, I'm never going to be that tall. And sure enough, they don't stick around.
Yeah. I mean, I found in philosophy that, like, when I got there, it was really intimidating because there were definitely people like that.
Tall?
No, people who were, who were on the grind already.
Oh,
who
yeah,
were already
yeah.
super professionalized and stuff. I guess with philosophy, there's more time to kind of catch up if you're not already there from the beginning.
If I could bring it back to comedians, like, I'm always impressed when a comedian is really good before they're 40. Like, say what you will about how the content of Eddie Murphy's specials haven't aged. You watch them, you see him kill those crowds, and you realize he's 22. You're like, oh, that's why he became who he became.
So, all right. So these really tall guys, right?
Yeah.
Or really fast guys or super athletic who walk into the dojo.
Usually tall.
I mean, how often do they really work out? I get the feeling that there might be a lot of guys who have those sort of natural gifts who sort of, because of that, don't realize that they still really need to learn how to wrestle. They need to learn how the business works and stuff like that.
This is true. I mean, I'm specifically thinking, way back in the day when I was training with Johnny Rods, the guy who was eventually known as Big Cass walked in, and like it wasn't long before we knew, no, they're going to take this guy. Not because we necessarily thought he was the best, but because as he said in other podcasts, they bill him at 7 feet tall. He's legitimately over 6'9", which is ridiculous when you actually stand next to somebody that tall. And he looked pretty good, and he was fairly athletic and all of that. But, not to say he didn't work hard, but he wasn't the hardest worker of the bunch or the most talented. They just saw, we can mold you, and then they got him.
And I think time told, actually, like, I think both things are true there, right? Like,
yeah.
They took him. But when it came down to it, he had like such a huge ego by then that he wasn't able to survive in the business where you have to kind of compromise that sort of thing.
What is the relationship like between age and being a good wrestler? There are some art forms where age and experience are everything. Some where it's more important to be a sort of the time. Like, I don't know, I'm a big believer that comedy, as much as I love comedy has a very short shelf life, and comedians themselves also seem to have a window of relevance for the most part. Athletes, for the most part, get to a peak and then it decreases with age. But wrestling is a combination of those things.
If you can stay relatively injury-free, age is very much an asset because it's a performance. If you know how to perform, you learn how to do it better and better. Like if you go see an 80-year-old, British actor that's been knighted on Broadway, you're going to be in for a treat. And like right now, one of the biggest wrestlers in the world is Chris Jericho. And Chris Jericho's in his late 40s. He also, however, has been largely injury-free for most of his career. He's just learned better and better, and he's better than he's ever been now.
And he's just been doing it the whole time, right? He didn't take a break because
he took little breaks to go on tour with his band Fozzy.
Yeah.
But besides that,
and
that's a grind in and of itself.
A lot of people seem to express the belief that Chris Jericho, pound for pound, is the greatest wrestler ever.
All things considered, I think he very well might be.
Especially with this latest run of his, he has a very good argument. Just ever since he hasn't been a top guy since the day he debuted, but let's say by now he's clocked in about 20 years on top and another 10 coming on up, either at the very top or just below it.
And he's reinvented himself dramatically several times now in his career. At least half a dozen times.
While still maintaining the core identity that is Chris Jericho.
Another guy who is a veteran, who I think is interesting to talk about in this context, is Rey Mysterio, who, he could do crazier shit as a younger guy, but he can do most of the stuff now that he used to be able to do. And since he understands wrestling that much better, I think he's as good as he's ever been.
So the relationship, yeah, if you take care of yourself, the relationship between your age, like your age isn't going to affect you that much as long as you take, because it's really more
Right.
like, oh, when you break your arm or when you fucking break your knee a bunch of times or something like that, it's just going to, it's just going to go to shit after a while.
This, by the way, is extremely relevant to the good match that we're going to be talking about this week. So let's
yeah,
get back
yeah.
to that soon.
Intro.
You're listening to Contesting Wrestling, the podcast where we talk about the things that fans love and things that other people don't understand about the world's most popular form of simulated combat. My name is Evan Burke. I'm a writer. I don't get wrestling. I've been friends with my two co-hosts for 20 years. We've actually been friends for 20 years now, you and I.
Yes.
Ben.
It's our bicentennial.
It is.
Decadial.
Yeah, whatever it is. I don't know.
There's a word for it, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
it is.
You
It's
look it up
late.
in your fancy school books and get back to us, Professor.
This is later than... Yeah, well, I mean, it's not like you're a professor of
Yeah,
time.
right.
Right?
Well, no,
you're
not
a-
exactly.
You're not a
That would be
timeologist.
awesome.
I mean, I do know some philosophers who specialize on time, and that is the thing that they're supposed to know.
Well,
But I'm not one
why
of them.
aren't fucking they here?
We can get some of them
Okay,
on
or
here.
we should. We should.
Yeah.
get-
I
didn't-
mean,
I
I'm
didn't
not
mean
sure
that to sound
exactly
hostile.
how it's going to be relevant to the podcast.
The
but
point. The point is, it's way later than we normally record these. This is episode. I think. Yeah. Now we're about on track. So now this is episode 8, and I'm not gonna have to edit out the episode number like I have with the other ones.
And if you
And-
do, nobody will know.
Yeah. You don't care. This is a free fucking podcast. You guys, what do you have to say about it? On this podcast, I demand that these two wrestling experts explain to me why I should enjoy wrestling, why I should care. We are keeping track of who wins and who loses each episode of the podcast. I, for the most part, have won, but there have been times when the other two win. There have been times where I've enjoyed it. Maybe there's a future here. Let's find out. They should introduce themselves.
Well, my name is Doc Diamondfire. I've been involved with professional wrestling for about 10 years. I'm a commentator, a ring announcer, a wrestler. I do a little bit of everything, and I've done a little bit of everything. And that's my story, Professor.
I am Dr. Ben Abelson. I am a professor of philosophy at Mercy College, and I need some way of justifying the thousands of hours of my life that I've spent watching wrestling, so this is good for that.
Yeah.
Luckily, I can justify the thousands of hours I've spent wasting time on my hobbies. Well, we don't need to get into that right now.
Well, you're justifying it by starting a podcast about wrestling.
It's going to be really ironic if we get popular and I become known as a figure in the wrestling community of somebody who's not as into it really as everybody else.
No, it's going to be great. You'll do the convention circuit. People will ask you questions, and you'll be like, I don't
I
know,
have no
to
idea.
raucous applause.
Finally, I can be rewarded for my ignorance about something.
It's the American way. I
It
think.
is. Especially I'm a white guy. America needs to fucking understand my ignorance and reward it.
Assuredly, some wrestling fans really won't get it too, and they'll keep asking you shit as
Oh,
if
yes.
you know something.
I expect people to be upset
Sorry,
with me.
guys.
I expect people to
I'm
be
not.
upset with me. And hey, as long as you're tweeting about us, that's what matters, because it's all about them sweet tweet dollars. I don't know how podcasting works.
The tweet and the heat.
So every episode, we do a good match and a bad match around a theme, around a style, around a request. This is based around a match that Ben has been badgering me to watch for basically since we started talking about this podcast. Is it safe to say this is your favorite match or in your top 3 matches of all time?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite matches ever. It's possibly my favorite match I've ever seen live. The experience of watching it live, it was incomparable to anything else that I've experienced watching wrestling live. I hope that some of that came across on the video. Watching it again myself, I don't know if it was quite as good as I remembered it and hoped to. It's still still think it's amazing. It's still one of the best matches ever.
What are the details for said match?
This is Samoa Joe versus Kenta Kobashi from the eponymously titled Joe Kobashi Ring of Honor event in October of 2005. It was at the New Yorker Hotel, the I guess the main ballroom
I think
of
it's
the New
the
Yorker.
Grand Ballroom, I think it's called.
Is it the Grand Ballroom? Because they also had the Grand Ballroom of the Manhattan Center.
Was that the Grand Ballroom? I'm a little fuzzy.
That was the Grand Ballroom.
Yeah, so I guess it must just have been the ballroom.
I mean, it could have also been called the Grand Ballroom. Anyway, riveting material. Yeah.
Guys, this is really bringing people in. I'm just saying, anybody who started with this episode, they're like, let's figure out this ballroom. People are sitting there with Google Maps open like, hold on, something doesn't add up because the New Yorker hotel only has 3 ballrooms and none of them are classified as grand.
So it's the New Yorker Hotel, which is interestingly located down the block from the Hammerstein Ballroom / Manhattan Center, where Ring of Honor would run many events in later years, and Madison, right down the block from Madison Square Garden, which is often known as the Mecca of professional wrestling, and which Ring of Honor finally actually ran themselves just this past spring.
So Ring of Honor was kind of riding high. The prestige indies had really come to prominence with Ring of Honor at the front of it, and largely their front man for the previous several years had been Samoa Joe, with Samoa Joe and CM Punk, but Punk had already been signed at that point. Joe was about to start a great, that eventually turned into not so great run in TNA. So when they announced that they had signed Kenta Kobashi, a man who had not come to America to wrestle before, but was undoubtedly one of the greatest wrestlers of the previous 10 years, there was a lot of buzz and there was a lot of question, who is he going to face? But there wasn't that much of a question. It was going to be Joe. Joe had wrestled in Japan himself already. He knew Kenta Kobashi. At least he had met him.
Yeah, so this whole generation of indie wrestlers that Ring of Honor was showcasing at the time largely grew up being really into Japanese wrestling, even though, especially the promotion that Kenta Kobashi came from, All Japan Pro Wrestling, which is where some of the most critically acclaimed matches of the 90s came from, was never broadcast in the United States.
Never.
None of those guys ever came, a lot of some Japanese wrestlers from New Japan Pro Wrestling, came to WCW and even WWE, but none of this particular set of wrestlers from All Japan ever came to the States, but they were highly influential. People used to watch All Japan by trading tapes. So you'd go to indie shows, there were people selling tapes at a table, or you would just kind of trade back and forth with traders. It was this real underground thing. So there was a not large, but very passionate fan base in the United States for this particular tradition of Japanese wrestling, and a whole bunch of wrestlers influenced by it.
I'm assuming that you were a nerd for this stuff at this point.
We didn't know that much about it, actually. This introduced us to the All Japan stuff, but we knew that people cared about it.
These people to wrestling are anime fans to the greater nerddom circa mid-90s when it was some real fringe.
Before you could just download whatever you wanted to.
Yeah.
Like, you had to work for that. Like, I've never been that into anime, but I had friends that I would go with them to, like, the kiosk in the mall in Chinatown to get what they would hope would be a decent VHS quality tape. Same thing with Japanese wrestling. And because you had to work for it, you appreciated it a lot more.
And even if you hadn't watched it, because we read wrestling magazines and there was already the wrestling internet, we had read a lot about these critically acclaimed matches.
It is good that they made you go to a different internet from the one that all the rest of us use, because we do feel very uncomfortable with the presence. It's good. There is the wrestling internet and the regular internet.
It is better.
Yes.
It's the superior internet.
Yes, our internet, is the superior. No, the one that I said.
Now, having been on the wrestling internet for a very long time, Evan is clearly right.
It is a terrible, terrible cesspool.
Yes.
One of the areas I think that wasn't such a cesspool of wrestling internet was the people who are really into Japanese wrestling. So my point is,
Mark Takus. Sorry, we can cut that. Sorry.
That's beautiful.
So my point is that there was this there was a sizable community of fans and wrestlers who were influenced by this particular era of Japanese wrestling, but because it was all so underground, the actual wrestlers in Japan had no idea that this fan base actually existed.
No, then they had no incentive to come and find out. I mean, this match was great. The atmosphere was great. But, like, he stopped playing arenas in Japan to play a hotel room in front of a few hundred real diehard fans.
But the thing is that Kobashi, from all reports, was completely surprised that people reacted the way they did when he came out. He had no idea that people actually knew who he was.
He does look a little surprised at the beginning.
That's
Like,
genuine.
He looks shocked that because people are like fucking into it.
They're chanting his name,
Yeah.
the second Joe's music ends,
It definitely right away felt like the difference between an arena show and like a mid-sized punk show where there's like a few hundred people, so it feels like a big crowd, but it's also small and intimate. And like, I don't know,
Everyone's into it.
the crowd seemed to be much more connected to the show and vice versa than the other matches that we have watched so far, especially the WWE matches.
Absolutely.
So Samoa Joe has said that he talked to Kenta Kobashi before the match and told him, no, these guys are here to see you. They love you. And Kobashi is like, nah. What should I do? Should I do like, because he had heard that Japanese wrestlers in America acted like sneaky World War II stereotypes. So he's like, I'll just do that. And Joe said, no, go out there and just be Kenta Kobashi. And he's like, are you sure? It's like, yeah, just do your thing. They're here to see you. So all that surprise you see on Kobashi's face is genuine. And you see him at the beginning of the match kind of realize, oh, they really are here to see me. They have seen my matches. They know what I'm going to do, and they want it. All right. And then his confidence comes up, and they go to the races.
And then with all of that, then Joe slaps him in the face. And that, I mean, the fans, a couple of moments after that, start chanting, "This is awesome." And that was, I think, the third ever "This is awesome" chant. The first one that I was ever present for, I think we had seen people chant it on TNA once before.
Yeah,
that.
we saw it on TNA. That Impact Zone crowd, they loved everything.
But that was the first time people started chanting "This is awesome," not for some big crazy move, but just because this was happening.
So if my first thought was that I was missing some kind of backstory, or missing because it did seem fraught. Would you say, so we talked previously about like different styles of wrestling and stuff like that. So this is exemplary of the Japanese style for
the most part. It's the Japanese style meeting a style that was highly influenced by it, but also by some other things.
Sure. But would you say maybe Samoa Joe is even playing into the Japanese style for the purpose of this match?
So Joe was the best example of what is known as the American strong style, whereas the original strong style is the Japanese strong style, right? So the base for his style of wrestling is Japanese wrestling, but with these other flourishes that were added in the American indie cauldron.
It seems more sustainable than the American style, right? Like the American style, you've talked about how historically it goes through the ups and downs of it gets about as fast-paced and high-flying as it can before people start actually dying, and then it drops a bit, and then kind of goes back up and then drops a bit. This style seems like a slower build. It seems like you don't do quite as many things. A lot of slaps, very slap. Lots of. There was a point where I was worried that Kobashi just had the chest slap, because that is kind of all that happens for a while.
The chops are very fundamental to Japanese wrestling. I mean, you could have a Japanese wrestling match that's almost entirely chops, and the reason for that is, well, there's a couple of reasons for that. I don't know, Doc. You want to jump in on this?
Well, chops are great. If you take them, I mean, they can hurt, they sting, but they're not really going to injure you. The worst that happens is that your skin might turn red and blister a little bit.
And also, like just chopping people just on the street and then running away, that's great. Who doesn't love that? But I'm saying in the wrestling context, I don't understand the entertainment value of it.
It makes a great sound, which is very good for large arenas. You hear a crack and everyone goes, oh, Kobashi, and like one of the reasons he does it, he had spent years kind of paring down his arsenal to just stuff like that. Like when he was younger, he used to be more of a high flyer and did a lot of more crazy stuff. But as he became more of a heavyweight, he cut down to like mostly chops and strikes. And then it just becomes the psychology of, I'm tagging you with mine and you're tagging me with yours. Let's see who breaks first.
Yeah, how much can you take? I can take this much, and then, give it back to you, and then it sort of crescendos in that way. And the problem, though, is that it's not just chops that are involved. Sometimes it's like forearms and kicks to the head. And once you start getting a little too intense with that, you get situations like what happened recently with this guy Shibata, where he headbutted the other guy for real, really hard, and it gave him a subdermal hematoma that basically ended his career. So that strong style can,
Yeah, you're not supposed to actually strong on the other guy to the point of injury.
I don't know what the Japanese attitude was, but the American wrestling media who loved Shibata's style, after every match that he did that headbutt, they, for the most part, people said, man, I wish he wouldn't do that headbutt where it's like, I'm hitting you as hard as I can with my head and it cracks so everyone knows it's real. Like, I'm not a big fan of like slapping your thigh to make a noise, but slap your thigh to make the noise before you use your forehead. And sure enough, it ended badly for him.
We're pretending, right? Like they know it's a like.
Yeah.
But like to use a musical metaphor, I find that Japanese wrestling is much more about dynamics. It's much more about like the crescendo and diminuendo. And you can do all of that with just chops. With like how ferociously and how quickly you're chopping the guy. And Kobashi gets to the point where he's doing the machine gun chops. So like you could have a match that's just like an ebb and flow of like slower and faster chopping. That could be super exciting if you're getting the crowd along with it.
I noticed that they both had a lot of really good like theatrical physicality. I felt like they were both expressing characters well. I guess Joe was the heel for this match, I would assume.
He was kind of playing the heel at the very, he established that by slapping Kobashi, even though he was the hometown hero. Like, that's an interesting story also to tell. Somebody came in to challenge the hometown hero, but everybody's behind the other guy.
In ROH, I guess in indie wrestling in general, like how much do they get into the storylines? How much do you see,
very
or at
much,
least in
very
that
much.
context? Like,
As
was there a storyline?
As much as any other wrestling.
There wasn't much of an overt like soap opera storyline for this, but the story of like one of the greatest wrestlers in the world from Japan is coming to America, and we're throwing at him our best. It's a pretty compelling storyline.
Sure, yeah.
Just have a one-off match.
The moves they did, like the head drops and all the crazy suplexes, like were way more than I think we ever expected Kobashi to actually give us. The fact that he took the muscle buster.
Right.
Yeah, I thought it was well paced in that towards the end when you started to see more the variety of moves expanded. Because I was getting a bit bored of the slaps, and then even it was like, oh, we're gonna go out into the outside the ring and slap each other. And then we're back in and it slaps.
Well, that's so they could do it right in front of the audience. So a lot of it is about the fact that it's the live performance as well.
I know this is not unique to this match, but this was the first match that I ever watched without commentary. And no offense to you, Doc, because I know you do a lot of commentary. Way better without commentary. Why have commentary ever? I agree.
For the most part, there are very few commentators in the history of wrestling who add something to the match.
I feel like you could do a lot with commentating. You could have the commentator sort of playing a counterpoint or, advancing the story or something. But in almost all of the wrestling that I've seen, it is the ultimate example of telling and not showing, where it really is just the commentator telling you how to think about the match, how to feel about the match, not expressing what the guys are doing. And it's also something where, like, the history of sports commentating is rooted in radio. Nobody's listening to a wrestling match.
Oh my God, if you listened to just Michael Cole and whatever other jokers they have on commentary these days, you would have no idea what's going on.
Oh, I want to point something out very important. To anybody who's listening to this that's been involved in wrestling for a long time, there's a certain style that commentators are taught to do, and it's to do exactly what Evan, the guy trying to get into wrestling, says he doesn't like. So maybe we need to use a different playbook than the one that's been around for the last forever. Okay?
Yeah.
Can I ask what do you try to do when you commentate? What do you strive for?
It depends on who I'm commentating with. If I'm commentating with a guy who knows all the holds and moves, I try and be more of a color commentator. I try and kind of put my emotion on top of the match. I try and feel the excitement and be astonished when something surprising happens and just try and connect the dots a little bit. If I'm the lead commentator, I'll more kind of tell the story of the match as it happens more blatantly, and I won't name every move for move, because some people will just say what the moves are, like you said, rooted in radio. But what I strive for is to add a little bit to someone who's watching. Also, when you're doing indie wrestling, a lot of the times the people watching don't know who the people are. So I have to
Yeah.
introduce them to that a little bit.
Okay, yeah,
I have
see
to
that.
say, oh, this guy from this town, he's done this, and this is his signature move, so watch for it. And then he does it, and I have to be like, oh, that's the move. This is probably the end. And then if it's not the end, I need to be surprised about that. And then people will hear that, and they'll get the story of that. Now, they did not do commentary on this match purposefully. The guy who ran Ring of Honor was doing commentary himself in general, and he knew, and this is very good Gabe Sapolsky. This is very good as a creative
or Matt
mind.
Pike, as he was calling himself on commentary because he's a huge High on Fire fan.
That's awesome.
Yeah, his Matt Pike. He had changed his name from Jimmy Bauer. So he knew. He often considered his run in Ring of Honor to be like we were the Neurosis of wrestling. A big stoner metal fan.
I've seen him at 2 different Neurosis shows.
There you go, man. But
Also, as soon as he left Ring of Honor, like the house music that they'd play before and between the matches dropped in quality by quite a lot. It changed from Supernaut as their opening theme to some fucking Jethro Tull song.
That does not. Jethro Tull's not appropriate for wrestling.
Sorry, Carrie, but
as much as I love 70s progressive cheesy,
Sure.
like that's not what you want for wrestling.
No. But anyway, as an artistic thing, as a commentator, he knew he couldn't add anything to this match. And in fact, anything he could say would just detract from it. Because these guys knew what they were doing. So he just laid out. They announce, if you watch the whole show and the match previous, the last thing he says is, I'm just going to go into the stands and enjoy this match as a fan.
And I think it was especially important to hear the audience for this match. And it really was like the greatest wrestling audience I've ever experienced.
Oh, yeah.
I talked a little bit of shit about the Ring of Honor fans when we talked about that Scramble Cage match. Because there were a lot of fans. I mean, that was... Well, the Scramble Cage was in Chicago, or
I think it was in Chicago. I remember hearing about it from Chicago, but I can't verify that immediately.
But
right
even
now.
like the New Jersey crowd, wasn't the same as this. This was the second show that Ring of Honor ran actually in New York City. It was, the smart of the smart.
It was the
fans.
third. We didn't go to the second one because we were going to see Mindless Self-Indulgence that night.
Right, it was the third.
That was good.
So like. There's even this amazing moment. I don't know if it comes across on the video, but I remember it very clearly from being there live, where a few fans started chanting USA and immediately everyone else started chanting shut the fuck up at them. And they shut the fuck up.
Not here, guys.
Yeah.
Not here.
Not appropriate.
If you don't know who the man in the ring is, you're probably not at the right show.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I got so excited watching the chopping that I just went and chopped this complete stranger next to me. And then I suddenly realized to my horror that I had insulted a stranger. But he was totally
He was
cool
into
with
it.
it. Oh, yeah.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, I think I might have been the first person who had touched him. And
Well, yeah, you had a girlfriend, remember?
that was later.
That was later?
That was later.
Okay.
When I was 16, I went to this Berklee College of Music summer guitar program thing, and I hated everybody else in the guitar program, but I was friends with this guy who was in the songwriting program that was happening at the same time, and we wound up just hanging out in Boston that week because we didn't know anybody else really. And he was really into the band Wheatus.
Oh,
Teenage
yeah.
Dirtbag.
Oh, yeah.
Remember?
That's
Nate Webb uses that
Webb.
song as a theme.
They played the entire thing at the Homicide show. He would not enter the ring to let them start the match until we had heard all of Teenage Dirtbag.
At a recent show, they got Wheatus to play it. I mean, that's $75 well spent right there.
Weird two connections that I have to Wheatus in my life is also a guy I used to play in a free jazz band with, then became Wheatus's drummer at one point.
Oh, it's a gig.
So, hey, dude, get paid. Leo, if you're listening to this, you're an awesome drummer. But anyway, so I saw Wheatus. We went and saw Wheatus at the Tower Records in Boston, and it was, I guess, at a time in my life where I was trying to start pits, and which was a very narrow window of time, because I think by the time I was like 18, I was like, oh, I don't think moshing's for me. It's a little rough. And Wheatus is playing a song, and I just shoved this guy next to me in a way that I thought was like a friendly, like, let's get this motherfucker started. And he looked very hurt. he looked at me and just seemed really bummed out that I just pushed him, and I wanted to be like, no, I wanted to start. Oh, that's not appropriate here, is it? I'll go, and I just found my friend. I was like, I'm gonna wait downstairs, man. I'll see you.
I am not cut out for Regis.
I shouldn't be doing this. I should be in my room running scales with the incredibly homophobic Mormon I was rooming with at the time.
Ooh.
Who is that?
It was this fucking guy it was this fucking dude from Utah that was also in the Berkeley Summer Guitar Program who they put me in the dorm with. Yeah. Anyway,
That's crazy.
sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
I know, it's good. That's a good story.
Side question: what is the lockup rule? Like when they're locked up, and then the fucking ref comes over after a while, and it's like, "Oh, enough of this! Enough."
If they're locked in the ropes, you have a count of 5 to get off of the ropes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whoever is like the aggressor needs to break the hold by
Okay.
5.
Yeah.
I was divided on this style. I felt like I could tell that they were both good. Here's the division: is that on one hand, like, it is nice to have a build up to the spots. I can definitely see how if, every match you watched was the more visually exciting matches, it would get boring after a while. I like how this style really allows for them to display greater theatricality through their physicality, and really lets them both perform and stuff. It was kind of boring in the way that it was also just kind of two guys slapping each other. Like, if you're not really they also did cool stuff. Also, when they do suplexes, I have some questions about like what the workout routine is that supplements a suplex, because it looks really hard to suplex somebody. It looks like there's a lot of muscles involved in doing that properly.
A lot of core strength, really,
Yeah.
for both the person giving and the person receiving. You need the core strength giving to be a base. And when you're receiving, you need the core strength to move your body deliberately upside down and then completely over the other person. You have to jump, but it's more in core strength than leg strength, for sure.
And you need to be willing to just jump onto your own goddamn head.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I imagine there's a lot of getting over. I imagine a lot of wrestling training involves you go to do things and your nervous system naturally reacts with a no, we're not going to do this. I'm going to prevent you from doing this.
It
I'm
goes
going to
against
send
all
stuff.
your
Yeah.
instincts.
And you gotta just jump
Gotta
in.
learn new instincts, I guess.
Yeah, you
But
gotta
like,
learn
I don't
new
know. So,
instincts.
like, do you see what I mean? Like, I both
Yeah.
get why this was awesome, but also like I felt like they could have cut out a solid 8 minutes of slapping. Like,
I totally get what you're saying, and I understand. Like, I'm glad you recognize that they're good, and I see why it wouldn't be your favorite match as somebody who's only enjoyed a handful of wrestling matches in your life. It's like, if you go up to somebody who's only seen a few movies and they like the movies and you show them Citizen Kane, they're going to be like, well, what's this? It's 2 hours. He's depressed. Why is it in black and white?
Where are the
even?
explosions?
Where are the explosions, you know?
oh, okay, hold on.
Yeah.
That is a bit of an oversimplification. My problem isn't just like, oh, I only like the fast wrestling where
No.
like they jump around and do stuff. I'm like, I feel like there's a lot of just
Yeah, I mean,
whoa! And then I'm like, I don't, not to take away from people who don't like that, but that's not just me needing a big spectacle.
no,
like,
you're right. You're right. They're genuine differences in taste. There's people who just hate watching the chop fests or whatever. And then, there's people who really like them. Like, I don't know. There's something about that rhythm and how it builds up in intensity that appeals to me. But I can see how, like, it wouldn't appeal to you.
Also, if, like, we keep bringing up, like, the crowd there itself, every time there was, like, a chop, you'd hear the crowd rise and fall. And if they went any faster, for example, unduly, they'd be stepping on the emotions of the crowd. And the whole point is to get the crowd going.
I will say it was nice to see wrestling that was being performed for the people there.
Yeah. This
which
was
is
released.
not the case for, like, this thing. I was like, oh, if I had seen this match in a WWE context, I would have no idea how the crowd felt about this or not, and B, the commentators would be driving me nuts and I'd be on my phone.
By the way, also, Kenta Kobashi's chops live, I don't know if this really comes across on the video, they sound different from everyone else's chops.
Yeah.
And that added a lot.
That's hard. That's hard to do.
It's true.
As opposed to sounding like a slap, it sounded like really like he's chopping wood.
Yeah, like an axe hitting a tree.
One thing that I don't think gets emphasized enough in wrestling is how much, like you talk about, how the match isn't as visually stimulating as other matches, but how important the audio is. How important the sound of them hitting the mat and the sound of the slaps and all of that stuff is in, like, I think a more of a subconscious, implicit level in how it affects the audience.
For me, it really solidified how much of a live thing wrestling is. Because I bet that if I was there, I would have been fucking all about it, because you get swept up in the crowd of people the same way, like, if I was at, even if I was at a really, really good match at Madison Square Garden in the cheap seats, I'm sure I would be asleep, and I'm sure I wouldn't care. But I got the feeling of how the immediacy of the live show, there's always a gulf between how good something is live and how good something is, like, recorded that you consume at home. But it just seems to be huge in wrestling.
Absolutely. I mean, I really think live wrestling is the actual art, and TV wrestling is the best approximation that they can present to a larger audience. You're watching a record of the thing and not just the thing itself.
Yep. And when you watch on television wrestling that is purely meant to be live, like if you see a recording of a non-televised event, something is really missing. Like, often it's not nearly as good as the TV wrestling meant for TV. But if you were at the arena, it would have been better.
It still felt not cinematic per se, but it had the good things about televised wrestling, where I felt like I was seeing what I needed to see at any given time to
took
get
you
what
into
was
the
happening.
ring.
Yeah.
Ring of Honor did a lot with a very low budget back then.
Yeah.
I think way better than the other indies of the time.
What's their deal now? Like,
they're owned by this horrible fucking media corporation, Sinclair Broadcasting.
Oh God, yeah, they're the fucking
Sinclair bought
Jesus
them a few
Christ.
years ago.
Yeah. If they could get any worse than the fucking McMahons, they did.
Yeah,
because correct me if I'm wrong. Sinclair Broadcasting, they're the ones who were like who put out like the local news packages and stuff, and it's the horrific propaganda. Jesus,
that's them. A few years ago, they
Wow.
bought Ring of Honor to put on their syndicated television stations. From, at the time, it was owned by a guy named Cary Silkin, who's still involved with the company. You know how like WWE and AEW are owned by billionaires? Cary Silkin's a millionaire. He's rich, but ain't that rich. And
Super nice guy.
Super nice guy. He sunk a lot of money into Ring of Honor when it was about to go out of business, because he's been a wrestling fan since the 70s, and he wanted to he believed kind of in the cause. And eventually he got tired of losing money from it, and it got bounced around a little, and now Sinclair owns them.
What's the old runner doing?
Cary?
You mentioned him earlier.
Oh, Gabe Sapolsky.
Yeah.
Oh,
well,
yeah.
So he was fired by Ring of Honor in 2008. Which was probably the best thing for both parties at the time.
I guess.
He just did his own thing for years. He started his own company called Evolve, and he had a relationship with a Japanese company called Dragon Gate, and had an American version of that for a while. And he seemed to kind of be struggling for many years.
Yeah.
Eventually, a bunch of the talents that he had first brought to light in Ring of Honor and Evolve and whatever made it to the WWE and became huge stars, and said, hey, Vince McMahon, this guy knows how to spot good talent. You should work with him. And now Evolve is basically a feeder to NXT. It's like the next level down from NXT.
Yeah, they'll send guys from NXT to wrestle at Evolve events. And whenever anybody gets really good in Evolve, the WWE just signs them, which would be a death knell for a company that wasn't getting paid by the WWE. But that's not the deal, So Gabe's doing just fine. He persevered, and we're glad that he did. He's very good. He was a direct apprentice to Paul Heyman. Or of Paul Heyman,
Who
I
is
should
that?
say. Paul Heyman's the guy that ran ECW.
Right, okay,
And since then, he's been
yeah.
one of the best creative minds in wrestling since then. A very polarizing figure himself, but everybody recognizes how intelligent and influential he is.
And I will say, it was very warm at the end. It was like a nice
Yeah.
warm ending where they were very respectful to each other, and it was very pleasant.
It was a
to see,
contest
yeah.
between athletes. It wasn't a grudge match between people who hated each other.
Just one other thing about Sapolsky, I think he really worked well on this kind of low level of indies where he can kind of let the wrestlers do what they want and just guide them in various ways. When I say I think it was a good thing that he left Ring of Honor when he did, Ring of Honor was about to expand, and as they expanded, as anything does, they got watered down. right? It wasn't the cutting edge thing anymore. They had to kind of rein in a lot of the wrestlers, and I don't think it was the right fit for him anymore.
What was it that made them cutting edge? Why were they cutting edge? What were they innovating?
So we first heard of Ring of Honor, Professor Abelson and I, in 2004. We had started going to independent wrestling shows in the area, which were objectively pretty bad, but we had a great time because we'd never been there.
There's a lot of
before, you know?
old timers, a lot of like garbage wrestling where they just hit each other with objects and don't really do anything interesting.
Like literal garbage wrestling.
Yes,
literal
garbage
Literally
wrestling.
and figuratively.
Yes.
And a lot of indie wrestling at the time was trying to be ECW, which had folded 3 years previous. So a lot of like extreme, a lot of cursing, a lot of hitting each other with stuff. And then we had heard that there was a company called Ring of Honor, and their champion, Samoa Joe, had been champion for almost 2 years straight. And this is in the age where if you were held any title in any company for more than a few months, it was like a tiresome marathon.
WWE and WCW, like all the major wrestling at this time, the paradigm was what Vince Russo called crash TV. It was all about having like the most surprising, crazy thing happen at every moment. Yeah. So it was tons of title changes, and like that was already starting to go out, I guess, when Ring of Honor
was finally slowing down a little bit. But like we had heard about Samoa Joe had been having matches with a guy named CM Punk. And they had an hour-long draw, which we had never really seen. That was more of an old-time thing, is that the champion would go to a territory and wrestle for an hour to a time limit, make the local tough guy look good, but not drop the title to him,
So in some ways, it was like a reversion to the early days of wrestling. It was sort of this weird simulacrum of the classic wrestling we had heard of, but had never actually been able to experience, while also having a lot of the cool things that had developed about modern wrestling.
Like creating a nostalgia for an age that you yourself were far too young to have ever experienced.
Yeah. Exactly.
But there was more to it than that. So that him and Punk had 2 hour-long draws, and the first show we went to, they had their third match, which was advertised as a no time limit match. But it wasn't just, how about we bring wrestling back to the old days? Then you watch the product, and the wrestlers themselves were wrestling a super modern style. They were taking influences from Japanese wrestling that you'd never seen. They were taking influences from Lucha Libre. The high flyers were flying higher, and the heavies were heavier, and they were just going at it as hard as possible. So there was something really unpolished about it that was very appealing, when the WWE product was just so sanitized, and they were the only game in town at that point that was on television.
And just one last thing to add to that, this was what we were talking about in our first episode with Bret Hart and Steve Austin, and that transition to the Attitude Era and the extreme style of wrestling and the extreme in culture at the time. This was the reaction to that. And it was really weird at the time to see this like subculture of people who were really into rules and really into like respect and honor.
The code of honor, which they had from the first Ring of Honor show, was that whatever your beef was before and after the match, you had to shake hands. And everybody at the first Ring of Honor show did, except one guy, and that made a huge thing. How did he turn heel? Did he murder everyone on the face side? Did he turn on his brother? No, he lost, and he didn't shake his opponent's hand.
And that is kind of a brilliant way to lower the stakes while keeping it interesting.
Yes, and it makes it more relatable, too.
Yeah.
One of their top guys, CM Punk, his whole thing was that he didn't do drugs.
Right.
And that's what made him rebellious.
He was straight edge. And like we had known what straight edge was,
Sure.
but a lot of people never heard of straight edge. And the line that he used, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs, and that makes me better than you. And
I'm already upset. Yeah,
right?
That's perfect.
So was everybody in the audience, the beer-swilling, pot-smoking wrestling fans of the time.
Especially in fucking Louisville, Kentucky, when he was an IWA Mid-South.
Yeah. The Blood and Guts promotion. He used to wrestle for.
I was upset.
Like, you can see, if you watch the IWE Mid-South stuff, you see him getting into the face of these people who probably do meth. and making
Yeah.
them very, very upset, like getting right down into their faces, like you are the scum of the fucking earth.
I'm better than you. I'm going to make something of myself, and you're not because you're worthless. And it worked. It worked like a charm.
He's also the only guy, or one of the only guys I've ever seen who was willing to like get heat talking shit about God and religion, be like, you believe in a God that I know doesn't exist.
I mean, that's ballsy to say to a bunch of religious meth heads. So that is commitment to your art form. We'll have to do a CM Punk episode.
Oh
fairly
yeah,
soon.
we can go on for way too long about CM Punk, I'm sure.
So something else that went on for way too long. Even if I can't fucking tell you how long this match
It
was.
only went like 7 minutes. So let me add one more piece of context.
All right, yeah.
So for this episode, we wanted to ease Evan into Japanese wrestling. So what we wanted to do was find a good and a bad match with one Japanese wrestler in America versus an American wrestler. And our bad match is...
So I thought specifically we should see how Japanese wrestlers and Japanese culture was being presented in the WWE
at the time.
And the match we picked is about a year previous to the Joe Kobashi match. It is from the Great American Bash 2004, and it is between Kenzo Suzuki and Mr. Ass Billy Gunn.
So from the opening gong, I felt so racist for watching this. It started, and I went to make sure that the blinds in my living room were properly closed so that the neighbors in the building across from me couldn't see that I was watching something that I... Okay, so, I mean, obviously it's racist. Obviously, we can establish that, but it was also dumb and nonsensical.
He had the geisha come out with him.
And like the guys bringing him out was that Hiroko. I don't know if that was
Hiroko.
His real life wife, by the way. And at the time, they valued like sex appeal and all the women on their roster, and the powers that be in the WWE saw like this beautiful Japanese woman and thought, no, we're gonna make you a geisha. It's the only thing Japanese women can be, right? Geisha. I don't even really know what that is, but I know the cartoons with them.
Are we more sexist or racist? I think we're more racist. I think that's obviously the solution.
Oh yes.
And first off, so Kenzo Suzuki seems like he's good. He seems like a guy who maybe was also good. Right?
In the proper context, yes.
He's got great facial expressions.
Yeah.
He has clearly been instructed to use the facial expressions used by, like, I don't know, white actors in samurai movies.
Yeah.
Or like it's real. I just fucking felt really uncomfortable watching him come out, and I thought, man, there's no way I could get more uncomfortable than what I'm feeling right now. And then came Billy
I'm
Gunn.
an ass man, Evan. I'm an ass man.
He likes to poke him. He likes to stick him. He likes to shove him. I don't know.
He likes to kick him.
So
he's an ass man.
What I couldn't figure out. So he
he's
comes
an
out.
Ass man.
He comes out, and I'm like, okay, so is he gay? Is that what this is? Is he a gay villain in 2004, and that's why the crowd is supposed to hate him? But then he also seems like he's got a real, like, I'm a man, America kind of. So it's like he's gay for America, but also he can't actually be gay. So he's like both a bro and a homophobic figure. And I just hated it. And he's like some kind of a fucking Aryan Superman. Also, there's just the real raw, naked, sexual psyche of America, like the naked underbelly of America's own homophobic self-loathing, fucking made into a guy who also was not good at wrestling or charismatic. Is this
I don't disagree with any of that, except the good at wrestling and charismatic. I think there were moments in his career where he did okay things.
Not in this match.
It doesn't
definitely not in this match.
And also, I don't.
Though
think,
that one tilt-a-whirl slam is still kind of cool.
I don't think any of the reasons that, at least none of the reasons that I hated him, had to do with anything he was intentionally doing.
So first of all, he's the baby face in this match, clearly, right?
Yeah, no,
Was he?
you're supposed to hate Kenzo Suzuki because he's foreign.
And
I know if
hates
you
America.
followed the emotion of the crowd, you would have gotten up and went to the bathroom.
I was gonna say, like, I have no memory. This match already has erased itself from my
It
brain.
was such a
but
nothing
I
burger.
also I feel like the crowd didn't fucking react at all to
No.
this match.
They chanted USA at Suzuki
Oh.
at some point.
Okay.
So Billy Gunn, he was only patriotic for the purposes of this match because they needed an American to fight
Okay.
the evil foreigner. The first thing they say when Kenzo Suzuki comes out is, "Well, he hates America." So Billy Gunn, it's a long and sordid. Well, it's
You
not
know,
that
I-
sordid.
It's not that
We
sordid.
also I mean,
So-
I know that this is the point of this podcast, but like, I feel like I powerfully don't care about Billy Gunn. I want to know. I
He's
want
sort
you
of
to tell.
interesting. He really is kind of interesting. So he started out as a cowboy. He was one of the Smokin' Guns,
Him and his brother Bart.
his
Bart
wrestling
Gunn.
brother. It's
They'd-
not his actual brother.
They'd come out in like long white overcoats and cowboy hats, fire blanks at the crowd, like cowboy circus style, really.
Back when it was still the like super kiddie
Like 94.
early 90s.
93, 94,
WWF
95,
of,
yeah.
of the Doink period.
It worked. It was all right.
His real name is Kip Sop. If that tells you anything.
I guess you have to get ripped. I guess you have to get ripped if your name is Kip Sop if you want to make it through this world.
Monty Kip Sop.
Monty Kip Sop.
That's not better.
No.
It's not better at all.
He's
So-
enormous. I've met him in person. He's like, very few wrestlers that big can be on camera and you can't tell they're that big. And that's not a compliment
I
to
guess
Billy
not.
Gunn because he's one of the largest men like you'll meet in person.
So-
you shake his hand and it just envelops your hand. It's like, whoa, how's it going, dude?
And he's in incredible shape still even. He's
Oh,
like
yes.
almost 50 and he's still ripped like he was on. But anyway,
Right.
so they had trouble figuring out what to do with him after the Smokin' Guns broke up. They made him Rockabilly for a little while.
They changed his jacket, had him like shake his ass. He was with the Honky Tonk Man, so they were doing an Elvis thing. It sucked, and it didn't go anywhere.
So then by that time the Attitude Era was starting to get into full swing. And he and this other guy who was also in like mid-card limbo
Doing another crappy music gimmick, I might add.
decided to join forces and became the New Age Outlaws.
They were essentially the Attitude of South Park in a tag team. It didn't matter that neither of them really could wrestle that well. They were perfect for the time, and they immediately got picked up by like D-Generation X. So they were like the crew standing behind Triple H. And it worked.
They got the most over of, like they did the most with the least talent of anyone,
Yeah.
I think, ever in the history of pro wrestling.
I can respect that.
I was never into it. At the time, Billy Gunn became Badass Billy Gunn.
Badass Billy Gunn. It flows off the tongue. It
Well, it's
fit
good that
very
they,
well
it's
in
good that they
'98.
tell you that he's a badass because
Yes.
there's no other way that he could demonstrate that.
So they do like this rant. Road Dogg, the other guy, would be like, "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, blah, 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 blah." And then Billy Gunn got the part where he's like, "And if you're not down with that, we got 2 words for you." And you know what those 2 words are, right, Evan?
No,
You don't?
no. What's happening?
Suck it! Yeah, it's that
yes.
one.
Oh,
Yeah.
suck
sorry.
it.
Wait, but
He
wasn't
said
that the other?
thing.
Well, they're in Degeneration X.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
they're a subset of Degeneration.
They were
X.
like
Yeah.
the B tier of
they're
Degeneration X.
legally allowed to tell people to suck it.
Yes,
They have
yes,
yeah, okay.
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, see, nowadays they still, whenever they do the DX thing, like because it's PG. I think they're ending that now, but for a while WWE was PG. They couldn't say suck it, but they could get the crowd to say suck it as much as they wanted.
Yeah.
I feel burdened by all of this information.
Anyway,
I
The
feel
worst
burdened
part
and
about
resentful.
the whole rant was Triple H being like, "Ooh, let's get ready to suck it."
What is Billy Gunn's? All right.
All right, so wait,
Like,
so anyway,
okay.
so Badass Billy Gunn eventually evolved into Mr. Ass. And it's just the ass thing. Like he wore like the neon tights with like kisses on it.
Yeah,
and
I
stuff.
noticed that.
Right.
Yeah.
Eventually, he formed a tag team with a guy named Chuck Palumbo. And they were called Billy and Chuck. and their gimmick was that they were gay together. Not explicitly stated, but as close to explicitly as you could possibly get.
So, how long were they heels? Were they supposed to?
They were heels.
Were you supposed
Yes,
to?
they
This
were
was
heels.
still at the time when you were supposed to hate people because they were gay.
How long? How long did that
wrestling.
last until?
About a year.
Wait,
their tag
how
team-
long?
No,
in,
until
in,
the hating-
in the WEW, when was the last time they had a character that you were supposed to not like because they were gay?
Probably then.
Yeah, I
really.
think that was it. Pretty shortly after that, they stopped doing those
maybe
characters.
Orlando Jordan.
No,
but that was
he didn't
that
do
was
that
in
until he
TNA.
was
That
in
was
TNA. Like until then, gay wrestlers in the WWE either were purposefully closeted because they weren't out,
Yeah.
or if they came out, it was usually a thing on their personality profile, and the WWE would support that, and they generally wouldn't bring it up on television because there's no reason to.
So-
Darren Young would come out and put his arms in like an equal sign and dance around with it. Like I saw him in the parade a few years ago in New York, even.
But that's actually gay wrestlers. Like
Actual
in terms
gay
of gay
wrestlers.
characters.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
They kind of stayed away from it after Billy and Chuck for a number of years. Only in the last 3 to 5 years has it completely flipped, where the flamboyant characters or the characters coded as gay are actually super popular baby
And
faces.
people are really into that.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
Velveteen Dream, Dalton Castle, guys like that. Unfortunately, those guys at least aren't actually gay. So now there's this weird...
That's problematic in a very different way.
Right,
yeah.
exactly. Now it's problematic in a different way where it's not actual representation. Now it's like gay face, or I don't know what you call that.
Yeah, no, I get gay face, I guess,
Um,
works, yeah.
But at least it's not anymore the thing where you get heat by acting gay.
Yes, that
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that lasts till what, like 2006, 2007?
Not even like
When we-
2004, like right around when we were watching this match,
Okay.
I think.
So Billy and Chuck, eventually the gimmick gets to the point where they're going to get married. And then the big reveal is they're not actually gay.
And then a couple of large guys
Yeah.
came out and beat the crap out
The
of them.
worst
Yeah.
part about the whole thing is Glad was super into Billy and Chuck and like promoted them as this like great representation of gay people, even though they really weren't. Where meanwhile in WCW, there was a gay tag team, Lenny and Lodi, who were actually a much more positive representation, and they were trashed by Glad, right?
Yeah. Well, this was a few years before that. WCW
okay.
didn't exist any by then.
I think a lot of it just has to do with the current political climate and whether they want to find something to hate or find something
This is
to love.
this
I
is the
guess.
most interesting conversation anybody has ever had about Billy Gunn.
Yeah, I was gonna say this is because I kind of went into this upset that I had to watch this.
Yeah.
Upset. It was, and it's all.
I don't
you
think
know,
we'll watch any more Billy Gunn matches. The only good Billy Gunn match, or like the only like notably good Billy Gunn match, is I guess Road Dogg and Billy Gunn versus Cactus Jack and Chainsaw Charlie.
I can see that.
And the only reason why that's so good is because at the end they put Cactus Jack and Chainsaw Charlie in a dumpster and shove it off of the Raw stage, and it was a really brutal looking stunt.
Something that I started thinking about as a result of this match was, so I did improv for a few years, and I stopped doing it for a lot of reasons, but one of the big ones was like improv is something you wind up having to practice in front of people. Like you wind up you practice largely by having shows, more so than like that's not necessarily as true for bands or something like that. Sure, playing a show is kind of like practice, but you should be more prepared for that. Improv, kind of like wrestling, or at least to me like wrestling, is an art form that when it's at 100%, when it is performed by the people who are the best at it on the planet on a night where they are on and having a good night, it's on par with pretty much anything else. It's as exciting, as riveting, as amazing, as hilarious in the comedy's case as anything else. And anything at 99 or below is pretty much fucking worthless. Like, you should really do anything else with your time. If you see the greatest improv on the planet, it's fucking awesome. And if you see the second best improv team, you should have stayed home and masturbated. And that would have been probably a better time for you. Unless you're a super nerd about it, which we've talked about how being a nerd for something is kind of like how is means that you have a lower tolerance or
Yeah.
you have a higher tolerance for the stuff that's not as
You
good.
gotta like the crust.
I'd agree
And
that's true with wrestling. I'd say that even with wrestling, it's the case that the lows, like the worst shit, is worse than anything else that has ever been produced by human beings.
I would say I would counter with, if you do improv for a while and you're like in that scene, you see some shows like a terrible improv show that goes together. Because one thing, you go see a bad stand-up, and it's like, it's sad in and of itself to watch one person fucking utterly bomb with all of the things that they worked really hard on, and you feel bad for them in that moment. But there was something about watching 8 people build a house of shit together and watching 8 people fail and varying levels of how much they even care or something. It's really, seeing terrible improv is really painful. And my point was that part of why I left, or part of why I stopped doing it, was like, I just feel bad when you make bad art. Like I'd get off stage and like my teammates would be like, "Oh, bad show, right?" And I would be like, "Do you know what we just did? We just took this time from everybody here, and it's just given as like, oh yeah, well that's just, hey, if you make stuff, you got to put it out, and some people are going to like it and some people are going to hate it, and it's not always going to be good and it's not always going to be bad, which is true, but you should really make an effort to not make shit."
As a wrestler, you're also risking your life. Right?
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
Yeah.
To make shit sometimes.
And this was a real, this good and bad match thing, it's tough because every time there's something that kind of makes me go like, all right, like I'm starting to see the upside of this and that, and then I watch something else where I'm just like, this should be shut down. The millions of wrestling fans nobody should listen to this podcast because this podcast shouldn't be happening. Because this shouldn't have been allowed to continue.
Hey, can I make you more uncomfortable about Kenzo Suzuki?
Yes.
So.
So the original idea.
Yeah. When they were gonna bring him in first, they started with like vignettes, because sometimes when they bring in a new wrestler for weeks beforehand, they'll do like 30-second, a minute vignettes on the show to build up who the character was. Well, originally it wasn't going to be Kenzo Suzuki, Japanese wrestler. The gimmick was going to be, he was going to be named Hirohito, the Japanese general, like from World War II. Because that's what Vince McMahon thinks of Japanese people. And they did a few weeks worth of Hirohito is coming for you. And everybody who knew who Hirohito was offended, because it's like, he was basically Japan's like reflection of Hitler. He was the one who's like, yes, we're in the Axis powers now. And people in Japan started getting wind of it and they were like, can we not? We've spent the last like several decades running as far away from this as possible. And people in America were just like, well, that's in poor taste even for you guys. So they dropped it. And then he just became generic Japanese heel number.
Before the Hirohito thing, even though, I remember we got wind that they were bringing in a star from Japan.
Yeah.
And we were really excited because we were starting to get into Japanese wrestling a little bit. We knew that Japanese wrestlers are generally really good. Or at least comparatively to their American counterparts. So we were really excited about this. They were bringing him in apparently to feud with Chris Benoit, who had his own experience in Japan, who was one of our favorite wrestlers, one of the best wrestlers of all time, had an unfortunate end. But I guess we'll talk about sometime more. I think we've referenced it a few times at this point in the podcast.
I am familiar with the details.
We'll talk about Benoit when we do the WrestleMania 20 main event, because it's also one of the greatest matches of all time, I think, at least. So yeah, he was supposed to wrestle Benoit. We're like, oh, they're bringing in this Japanese guy to fight Benoit. That's going to be awesome. And Kenzo Suzuki is what we.
Because you see, he's very tall. So when he stands next to Billy Gunn, neither of them look tall, because they're both so tall. And there aren't that many really tall Japanese wrestlers. So they were looking down them, and they were like, oh, no, get the tall guy. Looking back on like who they could have gotten as far as like up-and-comers, they could have gotten Hiroshi Tanahashi.
Sure, yeah.
He was just starting to show everybody that he was incredible. And like Hiroshi Tanahashi now is one of the best wrestlers of the past 15 years. WWE could have gotten him in 2004 and pushed him to the moon. No. They wanted the tall guy.
In some ways, I think he might be the most successful Japanese wrestler of all time.
Tanahashi?
Yeah. by this point.
Man. Inoki, dude.
What wound up happening?
Well, yeah.
Giant Baba,
Okay.
perhaps.
But I mean, like, if it's hard to compare, like he's been on top for so many years. They've probably made more money
I don't
in
know
those
about
years.
We'd
Yeah.
have to look into
I mean,
that.
Baba and Inoki made tons of money as promoters
Yes.
after their time was up.
Well,
I
they
don't
kept
know.
wrestling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's all right.
So what happened with Kenzo?
Why don't you cut
He was in the WWF for like 6 months, and then they sent him back to Japan. He didn't get over. They tried a couple things. He had a bit of a singles run. He had a tag team with Rene Dupree, was it? They won the tag titles briefly because the titles were worthless. They had him start saying "I love America" kind of ironically, which also didn't get over. And more, it was that they thought it was funny that he didn't know English and could kind of sing the chorus to "Born in the USA" with the silly accent.
Okay.
And then they sent him back to Japan.
All right. That's, you know what?
Nothing I say is gonna make anything
I know.
better.
Also, like my blood sugar dropped
Yeah.
in the last
Yeah.
5 minutes, and I think it's as a direct result of
Right.
this knowledge absorbing the living energy out of my body.
And you wonder why the
Uh,
biggest Japanese wrestlers of the time didn't want to come to America, didn't want to
Yeah.
try and be in the, because they think,
Right,
oh, you
this
make
is-
a lot of money. Kenta
that's the-
Kobashi would have done that. No, he wouldn't have. He would have come over and they would have treated him like that.
That's what Kobashi was expecting walking
Yeah.
into that match.
Because that's what he
Wow.
thought about what
Yeah.
American wrestling fans knew. And they're like, no, these are actually your fans who are going to treat you with respect because you're one of the best wrestlers in the world. And he's like, we'll see. He saw.
It really does seem, I mean, once again, it's like Vince has been working against his own interests for so long because of he's the man who believes he does not have blind spots.
Yeah.
And his life, and he's just riddled with blind. He's got blinders on and a big cardboard tube in front of his eye. Like, it's terrible.
I think by now he realizes that, and he's starting to put people in place.
This is a
to
very
cover those
recent
spots.
development.
Extremely recently, yeah.
Very
Extremely, as in Paul
Yeah.
Heyman.
Well, also, like, Triple H is rising to power in the WWE, which, I mean, Triple H is a flawed figure, but it's a good thing. He was a wrestler. He was one of the boys. He watches wrestling. Vince McMahon has never really watched wrestling outside of the WWE, to the best of anybody's knowledge.
Or
mean,
movies, or like anything
Yeah.
else.
Yeah, I feel like he is not somebody who's consumed
Right.
stories or media or knows how people talk to each other.
Well, like, Triple H will go out of his way to be like, well, there's this really cool Mexican wrestler. Let's sign him. Let him keep his gimmick. We can give him a slightly different name and then have him go out there and do his thing. That was, Mystico. It ended up being Sin Cara. It didn't work out, but that wasn't because they treated him like they were racist against Mexicans, which is a whole other story. It was because Sin Cara kind of self-destructed himself. But Triple H would then go and be like, well, let's push, the women's division. Let's get these guys from around the world that are awesome and try and have them, be cool.
There's this guy called Cabana, most well known for his podcast, Art of Wrestling, which I think just ended.
It just ended, yeah.
But he's dabbled in comedy as well, and he went into the WWE developmental system in 2007, and he's one of the few Jewish wrestlers of any prominence. And he came to Vince McMahon and said, I'm really into comedy. I think he used the phrase alternative comedy and like this and that. And Vince was like, "Oh, so like Jerry Lewis."
You know what? That is a lot less anti-Semitic than what I was expecting you to say.
Oh yeah,
I was really like, Vince is gonna be like, all right, I got an idea. We're gonna put you in a rabbi costume.
Well, they
then
they changed his name to Scotty Goldman. If that's
All right.
not bad enough.
okay, well, it's time to wrap this up. Is what I'm gonna take from that.
Well, the great example these days of a Jewish wrestler is a guy who goes by the name of David Starr. He's on the indies. He's a very fiercely firebrand guy. He's like, he wants wrestlers to form a union. He
awesome.
wants no part of the WWE. He doesn't have something against if you sign a contract to make money for your family. But yeah.
ROH booked him for a match in Israel, and he cut a promo like, "Oh, so they're booking the Jewish guy for Israel. Well, this is a progressive Jewish guy, and I'm not down with their fucking evil conservative corporation, Sinclair Broadcasting."
Yeah.
Damn.
Yo,
That's
and
awesome.
that
And also-
match never happened. If you were
Right,
guessing.
exactly.
And also, if a guy, if the Jewish wrestler himself had a rabbi character that he wanted to put out, that's great.
That's a different story entirely, of course.
I'm just, imagining Vince I feel like Vince just pitches anybody who's not a white guy first pitches an ethnic caricature character.
Well, that worked
then-
for Vince's father in the 60s
Yeah.
and 70s in New York, where there was already good representation
Sure.
of most ethnicities. So you have, all the ethnicities on your show, and then you fill the garden.
When was the last time we had a black baby face who didn't dance?
In the WWE, Mark
No.
Henry.
Mark Henry.
Mark Henry.
Because he's a monster.
Oh, well, the world's strongest man, Well, you won the world's strongest man competition.
I guess Apollo Crews doesn't
We're gonna
dance,
do-
but he didn't get over.
Yeah, he didn't get
Well,
over.
We will do our 5-part suite on the history of racism in the
It's
WWE. at
getting-
some point.
they have
But-
Cedric Alexander
Yeah.
now. He doesn't really dance.
Yeah, I guess when we think about it, they have progressed a bit.
So this has been Contesting Wrestling. If you enjoyed this content and you would like to hear more than just one episode per week's worth of content, you should support us on Patreon, patreon.com/contestingwrestling. You can find us slathered across social media. We are either at Contesting W on Twitter or Contesting Wrestling or Contesting Wrestling Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. Yeah, I don't know. There's all kinds of stuff coming out. My name is Evan Burke. You should go to my website, evanburke.biz, and read my writing, and follow me on Twitter at evanburke.etc, Evan Burke, etc.
Once again, my name is Doc Diamondfire. You should follow me on Twitter at Dr. Diamondfire. That's at Dr. Diamondfire. I am available for bookings, ring announcing, commentator, wrestling. At me, book me. I'm here.
I remain Dr. Ben Abelson. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram, or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ScribeBen. That's all you need to know right now.
And get ready for our upcoming episodes, where I think I finally have admitted to myself that I need to learn about Hulk Hogan, right? This is the one. I mean, it's even if you don't
Yeah,
know
brother.
anything about wrestling, you know this guy. I do have a very clear memory of him menacing the Three Ninjas. That was my familiarity.
So, what you gonna do next week when our first Hulk Hogan episode runs wild on you, Evan? Or I guess on our listeners as well.
I don't. What am I gonna do?
Oh, you'll record
We'll
a
find
podcast.
out.
Oh,
Tune
okay. I
in
didn't know.
next time to find out
felt
what
like-
Evan's gonna do.
It felt like there was a part 2 to this. All right, it's been Contesting Wrestling. Thank you very much.